Three massive beasts, dump truck, bobcat, huge trailer, jammed so tight in my garage the door wouldn't even close. Diesel fumes everywhere. $18,000 tools trapped behind tons of spite. Karen Whitfield, HOA tyrant, stands grinning like she owns my soul. Clipboard raised triumphantly. Emergency powers, she sneers sweetly.
Garage? Oops, jammed. Obey the landscaping rules next time.
She turns to leave, victorious. Huge mistake. I smile, walk over, drop the garage door. Click. Locked. From inside. Her smug face turns to pure terror. She pounds the door, screaming. See? Karen thinks she knows everything about property law, HOA rules, even my garage door system. But there's one tiny detail she missed. One little thing about illegal parking that's about to make her beg me to open this door before the sheriff shows up to handle it. What would you do if a Karen hijacked your garage and laughed? Drop your state below, because what happens when I let the authorities take over is absolutely perfect. Let me back up 6 months and explain how a simple wildflower garden nearly destroyed my life, and why that garage door moment was the sweetest revenge I've ever tasted. I'm Calvin Smith, 42, divorced electrician who thought buying a modest ranch house in Pinewood Estates would be my fresh start. Wrong. Dead wrong. But we'll get to that. After my divorce, I needed somewhere quiet to rebuild. Somewhere close to my teenage daughter Riley for our weekend visits. Pinewood Estates looked perfect. 1970s subdivision, tree-lined streets, neighbors who minded their own business. The garage sold me. Big enough for my electrical workshop, all my tools, the van, everything I needed to keep my contracting business running. The smell of sawdust and metal shavings in that garage became my therapy. Riley loved helping me organize the toolboxes, learning about voltage meters and wire strippers, the satisfying click of tools fitting perfectly into foam cutouts. Father-daughter bonding over electrical work. Not exactly conventional, but it worked for us. Pinewood Estates seemed like the kind of place where people just lived their lives. Most residents were retirees or working families like mine. Morning walks revealed the real neighborhood rhythm. Coffee brewing at 6 a.m., sprinkler systems hissing across identical lawns, the distant hum of lawnmowers creating suburban symphony. The HOA formed 15 years back when tech companies started expanding nearby and property values climbed, but the $85 monthly dues seemed reasonable for basic maintenance. The gentrification pressure was subtle but real. Original residents, blue-collar families, retirees on fixed incomes, suddenly sharing streets with tech workers who could afford aggressive landscaping upgrades. Most people adapted fine. Most people weren't Karen Whitfield. Picture this. 58 years old, retired insurance adjuster with the personality of a tax audit. Lives in the biggest house on Maple Street with a lawn so perfect it looks spray-painted green. Every blade of grass exactly 2 inches tall. Drives a white Lexus SUV that never has so much as a water spot, parked precisely centered in her driveway like she used a ruler. Karen's been HOA board president for 6 years, treating that title like she's mayor of a small city. She has this talent for weaponizing rules against residents she deems undesirable. Commercial vehicles, business operations, wrong mailbox colors, anything that doesn't fit her vision of suburban perfection gets the Karen treatment. And apparently, divorced electricians with wildflower gardens make her list. Here's where my problems started. I planted native wildflowers in my front yard. Not marijuana, not a junkyard, wildflowers. Drought-resistant California poppies and lupines that save water, support local bees, and look absolutely beautiful. The sound of bees humming through those flowers on summer mornings was the most peaceful thing I'd experienced since the divorce papers were signed. 1 week later, I'm drinking coffee and watching Riley pick flowers for her room when I hear the crisp snap of expensive paper hitting my front door. Violation notice. Heavy letterhead, embossed seal, the works. Non-conforming landscaping disrupts neighborhood aesthetic harmony. Property owner must install appropriate turf grass within 10 days or face $50 daily fine. $50 a day for wildflowers that were saving me $200 monthly on water bills. I researched the original HOA charter that night, reading every paragraph by the blue glow of my laptop screen. Guess what? No specific ban on native plants anywhere. The founding document has actually encouraged environmentally conscious landscaping choices. But Karen's interpretation of aesthetic harmony apparently meant every yard should look like Augusta National. I called the HOA office the next morning. Karen's voice could freeze summer. "Mr. Smith, the board has determined your landscaping choice is inappropriate for our community standards." "Which specific bylaw does it violate?" Long pause. You could hear her grinding her teeth. "The general aesthetic provision. I'd like to see that in writing with the specific ordinance number." "I don't appreciate your tone, Mr. Smith. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a neighborhood with looser standards." Click. She hung up on me. That's when I knew this wasn't about landscaping. This was about Karen Whitfield deciding I didn't belong in her perfect little kingdom. And that's when this whole thing started getting interesting. Karen didn't waste time. The harassment started the very next day. I'm loading my van for a job when I notice her across the street, professional camera in hand, documenting my violations like she's gathering evidence for war crimes tribunal. Click, click, click. My van, my driveway, my wildflowers, even my mailbox got the paparazzi treatment. "Just ensuring community compliance," she calls out sweetly when she catches me staring. This went on for 2 weeks. Every morning, Karen's little photography session. She'd show up with her clipboard and camera, sometimes bringing Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down as a witness. Henderson's 70-something and follows Karen around like a lost puppy, nodding at everything she says. The smell of Karen's overpowering perfume would drift across the street, something floral and aggressive that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Riley started calling it the mean lady's stink cloud, which honestly wasn't far off. But Karen wasn't just taking pictures. She was building a case against my work van. "That's a commercial vehicle," she announced one morning, pointing at my perfectly normal Ford Transit. "Commercial vehicles are prohibited in residential driveways overnight." I'd done enough electrical work for lawyers to know about research, so I spent that evening digging through HOA bylaws. Turns out there's this legal principle I remembered from a property dispute I'd wired years back. Something about how enforcement has to be reasonable and uniform. You can't pick and choose who gets cited while ignoring identical violations from your friends. Document every similar violation they ignore, and you've got solid legal defense if they try to fine you. Started my own documentation project the next day. Security cameras covering my driveway and front yard, nothing fancy, just enough to record Karen's daily surveillance missions. More importantly, I started cataloging every violation in the neighborhood that Karen conveniently ignored. Mrs. Garcia had roses and lavender instead of grass. The Patels had a rock garden with succulents that definitely wasn't appropriate turf grass. And guess whose house had decorative shrubs instead of lawn in her front flower bed? Karen's buddy, Mrs. Henderson. The sound of my camera clicking as I documented their yards felt like sweet justice. Two could play the photography game. I documented everything methodically. Photos with GPS coordinates, timestamps, violation notices sent to me versus the complete radio silence about everyone else's non-conforming landscaping. Karen was targeting me specifically, and I was building an evidence file that would prove it in court if necessary. Then Karen made the mistake that changed everything. She escalated to county code enforcement, claiming I was running an unlicensed business out of my garage. One Tuesday morning, I come home from installing ceiling fans at a dental office to find a county inspector wandering my property with a clipboard and the most serious expression I'd seen outside a funeral. "Someone reported illegal commercial activity," he explains, checking his notes. "Home-based electrical work without proper permits." My stomach dropped like a broken elevator. If Karen managed to get my electrical contractor license suspended, I'd lose everything. Riley's college fund, the mortgage, my entire livelihood, gone because some HOA tyrant decided my wildflowers were a threat to Western civilization. I walked him through my workshop, showed him my permits, explained my business registration. The inspector took notes, measured things, asked technical questions about my electrical setup. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Finally, he closes his clipboard and shakes his head, not in disappointment, but in disbelief. "Sorry for the trouble, Mr. Smith. Your home-based business permits are completely in order. Actually, you're one of the cleanest operations I've seen. Proper electrical setup, organized storage, all safety protocols followed." He paused, glancing back at his notes with a frown. "Between you and me, whoever called this in has contacted our office 4 times this week about your property alone. We don't usually see that unless there's some kind of personal vendetta involved." Karen had just handed me a smoking gun, official county documentation that this was harassment, not legitimate code enforcement. And I had every one of her surveillance visits recorded on my security cameras. But the real gut punch came that evening when Riley asked why That mean lady kept taking pictures of our house and whether we were in trouble. Seeing genuine worry in my daughter's eyes over some petty adult nonsense, that's when this stopped being about landscaping rules and became about protecting my family from a neighborhood bully. I realized Karen wasn't just targeting my wildflowers or my business permits. She was targeting me as a person, the divorced electrician who didn't fit her demographic vision of Pinewood Estates perfection. And if I didn't fight back strategically, she'd keep escalating until she drove me out entirely. Time to get serious about this game she wanted to play. Karen's next move was so brazen, I almost admired the audacity. Almost. 2 weeks after the county inspector fiasco, I wake up to the deep rumble of diesel engines shaking my coffee mug on the kitchen table. Not unusual, construction crews work early, but this rumbling wasn't moving, it was parked. I step outside and there's a massive dump truck sitting on the street directly in front of my house, engine idling like some kind of mechanical middle finger. Behind it, a bobcat loader on a trailer. The hydraulic whining as the operator tested the systems made my teeth ache. Temporary equipment storage, Karen announces, appearing from nowhere like a bad rash. She's got her clipboard, her smile, and a work order that looks suspiciously official. HOA Common Area Maintenance Project. This isn't a common area. This is a residential street. Emergency authorization for equipment staging. We're improving the landscaping. She gestures vaguely toward the community park 3 blocks away. My nephew's company got the contract. Of course he did. Her nephew Danny runs Whitfield Landscaping, an operation that seems to specialize in overpriced lawn maintenance and convenient family connections. The smell of fresh diesel fuel mixed with Karen's perfume created this toxic cloud that made me want to gag. But the real kicker was the timing. The equipment showed up exactly when I needed to access my garage for a big job installing security systems at a medical complex. Coincidence? In Karen's world, there's no such thing. The diesel fumes got worse as more equipment arrived. A commercial mower trailer joined the party, then a wood chipper that looked like it could process entire trees. The constant engine noise started at 6 a.m. and ran until 8 p.m. My quiet residential street sounded like a truck stop. I wasn't the only one getting fed up. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 houses down mentioned the exhaust was triggering her asthma. Mr. Thompson, the retired mechanic across the street, pointed out that the equipment was blocking emergency vehicle access. Fire trucks couldn't navigate around that maze of machinery. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just targeting me anymore. She was making everyone miserable to force me to comply with her landscaping demands. Collective punishment, like we were all prisoners in her suburban detention camp. Time to build some alliances. I started with Mrs. Rodriguez, whose mailbox had been painted the wrong shade of beige according to Karen's latest interpretation of HOA standards. Turns out she'd been fighting her own violation notice for 2 months, facing daily fines for a mailbox color that was literally 1 shade off the approved palette. Mr. Thompson had his own Karen story. His fence stain was apparently too brown and needed to be a more neutral earth tone. The man's a 70-year-old retired mechanic who built that fence with his own hands, and Karen wanted him to restain the entire thing because of a color chart dispute. The more people I talked to, the clearer the pattern became. Karen targeted residents who didn't fit her demographic vision: the Mexican-American family, the elderly blue-collar retiree, the divorced electrician. Anyone who might lower her precious property values got the special treatment. We started meeting at Rodriguez Family Cafe downtown, a little place where the coffee's strong and the owner doesn't care if you spend 2 hours discussing HOA politics. 8 families showed up to that first meeting, each with their own Karen horror story. The texture of those worn vinyl booth seats became familiar as we shared our experiences and realized we weren't alone. But Karen has her spies everywhere. The very next day, every single person who attended our coffee meeting received violation notices. Mrs. Rodriguez got cited for excessive decorative plants in her front yard, the same rose bushes that had been there for 15 years. Mr. Thompson's fence stain was suddenly an urgent compliance issue requiring immediate correction. My wildflowers got upgraded to a neighborhood safety hazard because they might obstruct sightlines. Then came the nuclear option that proved Karen had completely lost her mind. Mrs. Rodriguez's Honda Civic got towed from her own driveway. The violation notice claimed it was a commercial vehicle because it had a small vinyl decal advertising her cleaning business, a Honda Civic, with a business decal the size of a bumper sticker. But here's the kicker I discovered when I helped her get the car back. The towing company? Danny's Landscaping also runs a towing service. Karen's nephew made $300 impounding a Honda Civic for a violation that doesn't exist in any HOA bylaw. I was loading my van the next morning when I saw Mrs. Rodriguez crying on her front steps, holding the impound notice. A 60-year-old grandmother who'd lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, reduced to tears because Karen Whitfield decided her car didn't belong. That's when I knew we weren't just fighting for our own properties anymore. We were fighting for the soul of our neighborhood. Karen had just revealed this wasn't about maintaining standards. It was about making money off manufactured violations while driving out anyone who didn't fit her vision. The sound of Mrs. Rodriguez sobbing while her neighbors rallied around her with hugs and support became the moment everything changed. We weren't just individual homeowners anymore. We were a community that had just discovered our HOA president was running an extortion racket. And communities don't just fight back, they investigate. Karen's equipment invasion had been annoying. What came next was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Over the next 3 days, I watched those massive trucks slowly migrate closer to my property like mechanical vultures circling roadkill. First, they moved from the street to the edge of my driveway for better access to the worksite. Then they repositioned for safety reasons, because apparently a dump truck needed to be precisely 12 feet from my garage door to protect neighborhood children. The smell of hot asphalt and diesel exhaust became a permanent fixture in my yard. Riley started complaining of headaches when she visited on weekends. The constant rumble of idling engines made relaxing in my own home impossible. Worse, I had a major job starting Monday, upgrading the electrical system at a medical complex, and all my specialized equipment was locked in that garage. But Karen's timing was surgical. She moved the final pieces into position Tuesday morning while I was across town installing new circuits at a dentist's office. When I came home that evening, 3 massive vehicles formed a perfect blockade. Dump truck parked perpendicular to my driveway. Bobcat loader angled to block the side access. Commercial trailer positioned to eliminate any hope of maneuvering around them. My garage was completely inaccessible. $18,000 worth of electrical tools and equipment trapped behind a wall of steel and spite. Karen stood in my driveway like a victorious general surveying conquered territory, clipboard clutched against her chest like battle armor. Emergency relocation, she announced with that smile that could curdle milk. Public safety concerns required immediate action. What public safety concerns? Equipment staging conflicts with emergency vehicle access. The fire department requested repositioning for optimal response protocols. I'd done enough electrical work at fire stations to know that was complete nonsense. Emergency vehicles need clear access to hydrants and building entrances, not garage doors. But arguing with Karen was like trying to reason with a tornado, pointless and potentially dangerous. The real genius of her trap became clear when I tried to open my garage door. Nothing. The remote control clicked uselessly in my hand. She'd had her nephew's crew disconnect the power while positioning their equipment, claiming accidental damage during repositioning procedures. Manual release? The backup system required pulling a red cord inside the garage. But with 3 tons of machinery blocking the door, I couldn't even squeeze through the gaps to reach it. Karen had just locked away my livelihood and stood there acting like she'd done me a favor. My stomach dropped as the implications hit. Without my tools, I'd have to cancel the medical complex job. That meant losing $12,000 in contracted work, plus the reputation damage of backing out at the last minute. Karen wasn't just harassing me anymore. She was destroying my business. I spent that evening researching property access laws, and what I found was encouraging. Years ago, I'd helped an attorney friend wire his home office, and we'd discussed a case where someone blocked access to a commercial property. There's legal precedent dating back to English common law about blocking someone's access to their property. It's called false imprisonment of property. And in most states, it's both a civil violation and a criminal offense. The key is proving intentional obstruction versus accidental interference. Karen's emergency repositioning during my absence, combined with the convenient power disconnection, was going to be hard to explain as coincidence. The next morning, I called board member Rajesh Patel, a software engineer who'd always seemed reasonable in the few HOA meetings I'd attended. His response shocked me. "Marcus, I need to ask you something in confidence. Did the full board vote on this equipment placement?" Karen said it was an emergency authorization. Long pause. The sound of computer keys clicking in the background. "We haven't had a board meeting in 6 weeks. Karen's been making decisions unilaterally and claiming board approval after the fact. I've been documenting it, but she controls all the official communications. That's when the pieces clicked together. Karen wasn't just abusing her authority, she was operating outside it entirely. Every board decision she'd cited, every official policy she'd enforced, every fine she'd threatened, all unauthorized actions by someone drunk on imaginary power. But the real bombshell came when Patel shared what he'd discovered about the landscaping contract. Danny Whitfield's company was never properly vetted. No competitive bidding, no conflict of interest review, no board approval. Karen awarded her nephew a $12,000 annual contract and backdated the paperwork to make it look legitimate. I'd stumbled into something much bigger than harassment. This was fraud. The biggest twist hit me Wednesday evening when my electrician buddy Jake called with information that made my head spin. He'd been working on Karen's house the previous week, upgrading her electrical panel, and noticed something that didn't add up. Marcus, she's got a full apartment back there in her converted garage. Kitchen, bathroom, separate entrance, the works. Someone's definitely living there. I saw personal belongings, food in the fridge, everything. But when I asked about the electrical load for a rental unit, she got real defensive and said it was just storage space. Illegal rental income, in a neighborhood zoned for single-family residences only. I felt that electric thrill you get when all the circuit breakers align perfectly. Karen Whitfield, defender of HOA rules and neighborhood standards, was running an unlicensed rental operation while collecting illegal profits and dodging property taxes. The woman who'd spent months harassing me about wildflowers was violating more housing codes than I could count. I sat in my living room that night, staring at my blocked garage through the window, and realized Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd trapped my tools, but she'd also trapped herself in a web of lies, fraud, and regulatory violations that would make her wildflower complaints look like jaywalking tickets. The taste of irony was sweeter than Riley's homemade cookies. Time to turn Karen's own game against her. And I knew exactly where to start. That night I couldn't sleep, not because of the diesel fumes. I'd gotten used to those. It was the puzzle pieces clicking together in my head like a perfectly wired circuit board. Rajesh Patel called me at 7 the next morning. "Marcus, can you meet me at the coffee shop? I've got something you need to see." 20 minutes later, I'm staring at a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. The familiar scent of fresh coffee filled Rodriguez Family Cafe as Patel slides it across the scratched table like we're conducting some Cold War intelligence exchange. "Original HOA incorporation documents," he whispers. "I finally got copies from the county clerk." I open the folder, and there it is, buried on page 47. Board president may be removed from office by majority petition of homeowners, requiring signatures from 51% of current residents. My coffee stopped halfway to my mouth. Karen never mentioned this. Because she's been presenting herself as untouchable. Patel's finger traces the paragraph. "Look, removal doesn't require cause, just signatures. We need 67 signatures from our 132 households." Section 12.3 was crystal clear. Board members cannot award contracts to family members without competitive bidding and full board approval. Karen's nephew getting that landscaping deal, completely illegal under the HOA's own rules. But Patel wasn't finished. He slides property tax records across the table, the paper still warm from the county printer. Karen's been claiming single-family residential for tax purposes. But if Jake's right about that garage conversion, he pulls out his calculator. She's been dodging $4,000 yearly in property taxes, 6 years of illegal rental income, $24,000 in unpaid taxes, plus penalties and interest. The beautiful irony hit me like 220 volts through wet hands. Karen Whitfield, harassing neighbors about wildflower gardens, was committing actual tax evasion while operating an illegal business in violation of zoning laws. "There's more," Patel continued, glancing around the busy cafe. "Danny's double billing the HOA. We pay for common area maintenance, but half the work is on Karen's personal property. Trimming her hedges, power washing her driveway, all charged as association expenses, $12,000 yearly for landscaping that used to cost $4,000. The texture of those invoices felt like evidence between my fingers. Karen had been funneling $8,000 annually into her family's pockets while threatening neighbors with fines over mailbox colors. "One last thing," Patel said quietly. "I reached out to other board members. Karen's been forging meeting minutes for 8 months, claiming unanimous votes on decisions we never discussed. Every board approval she cited to you, complete fiction." My phone buzzed with Jake's text. Talked to county code enforcement. Karen's garage conversion has no permits. Kitchen, bathroom, electrical, plumbing, all illegal installations. One complaint shuts her down immediately. I leaned back in the vinyl booth, feeling the cracked upholstery against my shoulders as the full scope became clear. Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant, she was running sophisticated embezzlement disguised as HOA governance. The violation notices, the harassment, the selective enforcement, all designed to distract from her actual crimes. Then Patel mentioned something that made my electrician's brain light up. Thompson's daughter works for the regional newspaper. She's been asking questions about HOA abuse stories. Apparently there's growing interest in corruption at the local government level. Media attention, public scrutiny. The one thing people like Karen fear most, exposure. I sat there surrounded by the comforting sounds of neighborhood life and realized the power dynamic had just shifted completely. Karen thought she held all the cards, but she'd been playing with a marked deck that was about to get her thrown out of the game entirely. The question wasn't whether I could fight back anymore. The question was how strategically I wanted to dismantle Karen's illegal empire. Legal removal through petition, financial exposure through tax investigation, media pressure through corruption reporting, criminal charges through code enforcement complaints, looking at those trucks still blocking my garage, trapping my livelihood behind manufactured authority. Time to show Karen what happens when you pick a fight with someone who knows how to wire the whole system. The next morning I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes from having a perfect plan. Karen had given me all the tools I needed to destroy her little empire. I just had to use them strategically. First stop, Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen table, which had become our unofficial war room. The smell of fresh coffee and homemade churros filled the air as 8 neighbors crowded around laptop screens and printed documents. Riley was at her friend's house, which was perfect. This was adult business that required serious focus. We need 67 signatures, I explained, spreading Patel's research across the scratched wooden surface. That's 51% of our 132 households. But we can't just knock on doors randomly. We need to target people who've been affected by Karen's overreach. Mrs. Rodriguez had been keeping a list, her handwriting shaky with anger. The Johnsons got fined for Christmas decorations staying up too long. The Smiths got cited for parking their RV in their own driveway. The Williams family got harassed about their vegetable garden. Thompson leaned back in his chair, the old vinyl creaking under his weight. My daughter Sarah wants to interview people for her newspaper story, but we need to be careful. Karen's got friends at City Hall who might tip her off. That's when I realized this wouldn't be as easy as I'd hoped. Karen had been building her network for 6 years. She knew people, had favors to call in, connections that could make our lives difficult if we weren't smart about this. Here's how we coordinate, I said, my electrician's brain working through the logistics. Petition drive happens fast. 1 week, not 2. Hit the houses Karen's targeted first, then expand to sympathetic neighbors. We document everything with photos and timestamps. Patel opened his laptop, but his expression was troubled. I've been thinking about the legal exposure here. If Karen finds out we're organizing against her before we have enough signatures, she could retaliate. More violation notices, more equipment blocking driveways, maybe even legal action for harassment. The smell of Mrs. Rodriguez's churros suddenly seemed less comforting. Karen wasn't just going to sit there while we dismantled her empire. She'd fight back, and she had tools we were just starting to understand. Mrs. Rodriguez volunteered to create bilingual flyers, but her hands trembled as she spoke. What if she finds out I'm helping? My cleaning business depends on referrals from this neighborhood. The sound of real fear in her voice hit me like a cold splash of water. This wasn't just about my blocked garage anymore. These people were risking their livelihoods, their homes, their peace of mind to stand up to a bully. And if we failed, Karen would make all of them pay. Thompson's mechanical expertise became crucial for the timing. Those trucks blocking your garage, they're violating county parking ordinances. Fire lane access, distance from hydrants, overnight commercial vehicle storage in residential areas. But here's the thing. If we report them too early, Karen might move them before we're ready. The coordination required military precision. Sarah Thompson arrived that afternoon with her reporter's notebook, bringing both opportunity and risk. The texture of her business card felt like either victory or target practice, depending on how this went. I've been tracking HOA corruption stories statewide, she explained, but I need to warn you, once this story goes public, there's no going back. Karen will know exactly who's behind it. We spent 2 hours walking her through Karen's pattern of harassment, but every revelation felt like we were loading ammunition for both sides. Sarah's questions got sharper as the scope became clear, but so did the potential for retaliation. The door-to-door campaign revealed just how deep Karen's intimidation went. The Garcias whispered their story about the $300 fine for their St. Francis statue, constantly glancing over their shoulders like Karen might materialize from thin air. The Patels had been too afraid to challenge their rock garden violation, worried about making things worse. Each signature felt like victory and vulnerability combined. By day 5, we had 43 confirmed signatures, but also 3 families who'd been approached by Karen with friendly warnings about troublemakers in the neighborhood. Karen was on to us. The real breakthrough came when Jake called with urgent news from his county contact. They're ready to inspect Karen's property, but there's a problem. Someone's been calling the code enforcement office claiming harassment by disgruntled neighbors. They're asking for documentation that this isn't retaliation. My stomach dropped. Karen was already working her connections, trying to frame our legitimate complaints as petty revenge. We needed to move faster, hit harder, coordinate everything perfectly. Anonymous tips filed with tax assessor. Media interviews scheduled for next week. Petition signatures at 58 and climbing, but Karen's counter-campaign intensifying. All the pieces were in position, but so were hers. The smell of battle was in the air, and the taste of it was equal parts excitement and terror. Time to spring the trap and find out who really controlled this neighborhood. Karen's counterattack came faster and more vicious than I expected. Monday morning, every single person who'd signed our petition found an official-looking envelope taped to their front door. Not mailed, hand-delivered in the dead of night like some kind of suburban terrorism campaign. I opened mine while Riley ate breakfast, the sound of her spoon clinking against her cereal bowl suddenly the only normal thing in my world. "Notice of Property Value Impact Assessment," the letterhead screamed in bold red text. "Recent organizing activities by certain residents may negatively impact property values throughout Pinewood Estates. Homeowners insurance and mortgage companies have been notified of potential neighborhood instability." My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. Karen was threatening to torpedo everyone's property values and insurance rates. But the really sick part? The letterhead looked official enough to fool most people, complete with fake county seal and legal-sounding language. Riley looked up from her cereal, sensing the tension. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just neighborhood stuff." But my hands were shaking as I folded the letter. If Karen could convince mortgage companies that our neighborhood was unstable, she could literally force people into foreclosure. Mrs. Rodriguez called 20 minutes later, her voice breaking. "Marcus, my mortgage company called. They're reviewing my loan because of community disruption reports. And there's something else. There's a 4th truck now." I drove over to see Karen's latest escalation, and the sight made my blood boil. A massive cement mixer had joined the blockade, completely sealing off my driveway. The diesel fumes were so thick I could taste them burning my throat, sharp and chemical. But worse, the positioning wasn't just blocking my garage anymore. It was blocking my front door access too. Karen stood in the middle of it all like a general surveying her battlefield, talking to a man in a county inspector's uniform. The sound of hydraulic systems testing echoed off the houses like mechanical screaming. "Mr. Smith," she called out sweetly as I approached. "I was just explaining to Inspector Williams about the safety concerns your organizing activities have raised. Apparently gathering neighbors for meetings violates our community guidelines about commercial activities." The inspector looked embarrassed to be there. "Sir, I've received reports about unauthorized assembly and potential business operations. I'm required to investigate any complaints about home-based commercial activity. My electrician's license could be suspended if they found evidence of unlicensed business operations." Karen had just weaponized county code enforcement against our petition drive, threatening my livelihood while claiming our neighborhood meetings violated zoning laws. But her biggest mistake was underestimating how angry her threats had made everyone. Thompson called an emergency meeting that evening at his house, family barbecue, to avoid zoning violations. The smell of actual burgers sizzling on his grill provided cover as 22 families crowded into his backyard, faces grim with determination. "She's threatening our property values," Mr. Garcia said, waving his intimidation letter. "My mortgage company called asking about neighborhood disputes. This could tank my refinancing." Mrs. Rodriguez was fighting back tears. She contacted 3 of my clients today, Told them I was involved in disruptive activities that might reflect poorly on their homes. I've already lost 2 contracts. The smell of barbecue smoke mixed with the taste of collective rage. Karen had crossed the line from harassment to economic warfare, targeting people's livelihoods and homes. Then Sarah Thompson delivered the bombshell that changed everything. I got a call from the Peterson family, she announced, flipping through her reporter's notebook. They want to recant their statement about Calvin threatening Karen. Turns out Karen offered to waive their HOA dues for 6 months in exchange for signing a complaint they never actually witnessed. The backyard fell silent except for the hiss of Thompson's grill. Karen had been manufacturing evidence, bribing neighbors to support her harassment campaign. The Petersons have the text messages, Sarah continued. Karen's exact words. A small favor for the community, and your dues situation becomes more manageable. They're willing to go on record. I felt that familiar electric thrill, but it was mixed with something darker. Bribery, fraud, extortion. Karen had just handed us criminal evidence, but she'd also shown she was willing to destroy innocent families to protect her power. Patel had been quietly working his laptop throughout the barbecue. There's more. Karen called an emergency board meeting yesterday, except she never notified the other board members. She's planning to pass a resolution banning political activities and imposing $1,000 fines for community disruption. And, he added grimly, she's hired Andrews, Mitchell and Associates. They specialize in HOA harassment litigation. Karen's planning to sue anyone who continues with the petition drive. The backyard fell silent. Karen wasn't just fighting dirty, she was going nuclear, willing to bankrupt families and destroy the neighborhood to maintain her stranglehold. But as I looked around at 22 determined faces illuminated by barbecue flames, I realized Karen had made her biggest tactical error. Instead of dividing us with fear, she'd united us with righteous anger. Good, I said finally, raising my beer bottle. Let her hire lawyers and threaten mortgages, because what she doesn't know is that we've got 63 signatures, the media's exposing her corruption tomorrow, and county code enforcement is inspecting every illegal thing she's been hiding. The taste of victory mixed with barbecue smoke. Time to show Karen what happens when you wage war against people defending their homes. Karen's final play was desperate, sloppy, and absolutely perfect for what I had planned. Wednesday morning, I wake up to pounding on my front door and the sound of official voices. Through the window, I see 2 sheriff's deputies, a woman in a business suit, and Karen hovering behind them like a vulture in designer clothes. Marcus Smith? The taller deputy checks his clipboard. We have a temporary restraining order regarding harassment of Ms. Karen Whitfield and disruption of community peace. The papers felt surreal in my hands. Karen was claiming I'd threatened her physical safety, organized mob intimidation tactics, and created a hostile environment that endangered her well-being. The restraining order prohibited me from organizing meetings, distributing materials, or coming within 100 feet of her property. This is harassment, I said, keeping my voice level despite wanting to scream. That's for the court to decide, sir. Please review the documents carefully. The woman in the suit stepped forward as the deputies left. Mr. Smith, I'm Rebecca Andrews from Andrews, Mitchell and Associates. My client is prepared to file additional civil suits against you and your co-conspirators for defamation, property value damages, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. However, she's willing to consider a settlement if you cease all organizing activities immediately. Karen's smile behind her lawyer was pure poison. She thought she'd won, but her restraining order had just triggered the biggest mistake of her life. I called Patel the moment they left. Emergency meeting, tonight, but not at anyone's house. Karen will claim violation of the restraining order. We gathered at Rodriguez Family Cafe after closing time, Mrs. Rodriguez letting us in through the back door. The smell of lingering coffee and fried food couldn't mask the tension as 28 neighbors crowded into the small restaurant, voices low and urgent. She's trying to make this illegal, Thompson said, his weathered hands shaking with anger. First the threats, now the courts. What's next, calling us terrorists? But Sarah had been busy. I interviewed the Petersons this afternoon, full confession about Karen's bribery attempt, complete with screenshots of her text messages. And I found something else. Karen's been using HOA funds to pay her legal fees. The revelation hit like electricity through water. Karen was embezzling association money to finance her war against the residents she was supposed to serve. $12,000 in legal fees charged to Community Security Consulting, Patel confirmed, scrolling through financial records on his laptop. She's been planning this campaign for months. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "My husband fought in Vietnam to protect our democracy. I'm not letting some HOA dictator destroy it in my own neighborhood." She pulled out a crumpled paper. "I got 7 more signatures today. We're at 71. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. We'd exceeded our target while Karen was busy with lawyers and restraining orders. But the real shock came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, Karen's loyal sidekick, appeared at the cafe's front door like a ghost. Mrs. Rodriguez let her in, and the 70-something woman looked around nervously before speaking. "I need to tell you something about Karen," she whispered. She's been making me do things, taking pictures of your houses, reporting on your activities. She said if I didn't help, she'd have my property condemned for code violations." The mini twist knocked the air out of the room. Karen's most visible ally was actually another victim, coerced into collaboration through threats and intimidation. "She's got files on everyone," Henderson continued, her voice gaining strength. "Photos, violation reports, financial information she's gathered illegally. She calls it her insurance policy." I felt the pieces clicking together like a perfectly wired circuit. Karen's entire operation was built on blackmail, extortion, and manufactured evidence. She'd turned HOA governance into organized crime. Thursday morning brought the final confirmation that Karen was spiraling out of control. She called her own press conference. I watched from across the street as a single local TV reporter and a photographer showed up to Karen's front lawn, where she'd set up a podium like she was announcing a presidential campaign. The sound of her voice carried across the diesel fumes from her equipment blockade. "The peaceful residents of Pinewood Estates are under attack by outside agitators seeking to destroy our community values," she declared, reading from prepared remarks. "These extremists are using intimidation tactics to undermine legitimate governance and threaten property values." Sarah Thompson stood next to the other reporter, taking notes with barely concealed amusement. Karen didn't know that her community defense press conference was actually providing perfect footage for tomorrow's corruption expose. But the most beautiful moment came when the reporter asked Karen about the financial irregularities Patel had discovered. "All HOA expenditures are properly documented and board approved," she insisted. "Even the legal fees charged as security consulting?" Karen's face went white. She'd just been caught lying on camera about embezzlement. That evening, I sat in my living room staring at my still-blocked garage and realized everything was finally aligned. Karen had overplayed every hand, alienated every ally, and created enough evidence to bury herself completely. Her restraining order expired in 2 days. Her illegal trucks were violating 6 municipal ordinances. Her embezzlement was documented. Her bribery was recorded. Her media strategy had backfired spectacularly. All I had to do now was spring the trap she'd built for herself. Time to show Karen what happens when you pick a fight with someone who knows how to wire the whole system and isn't afraid to flip the switch. Friday morning, the restraining order expires at noon. County code enforcement arrives at 12:15. Perfect timing. I'm standing in my driveway, surrounded by 3 massive trucks that have been my prison for 2 weeks, when Karen appears with that familiar clipboard and victorious smile. She doesn't know that Sarah Thompson is filming from Thompson's front yard, or that County Inspector Williams has GPS coordinates showing 6 different municipal violations, or that Sheriff Deputy Martinez is parked around the corner waiting for my signal. "Well, Mr. Smith," Karen announces, loud enough for the growing crowd of neighbors to hear, "I hope you've learned something about respecting community authority." The smell of diesel fumes fills the air between us, but I'm breathing easier than I have in weeks, because everything that happens next has been choreographed to perfection. Actually, Karen, I have learned something. I pull out my phone, finger hovering over my contacts. I learned that you don't have emergency authority. I learned that you never had board approval. And I learned that blocking property access is a criminal offense. Her smile falters slightly. The equipment stays until you comply with landscaping requirements. That's when I spring the trap she built for herself. What landscaping requirements? The ones you made up? The board votes that never happened, or the authority you never actually had? I hit speed dial. Deputy Martinez? It's Calvin Smith. They're refusing to move the vehicles blocking my property access. Yes, sir. I'll wait right here. Karen's face goes from smug to confused to terrified in about 3 seconds. You can't do that. I have emergency powers. No, Karen, you don't. The sound of the sheriff's cruiser pulling up draws more neighbors from their houses. Mrs. Rodriguez, Thompson, the Patels, the Garcias, they've all been waiting for this moment. Sarah Thompson switches from hiding to openly filming as Deputy Martinez approaches with his citation book. Ms. Whitfield, the deputy says professionally, these vehicles are in violation of County Ordinance 15.2.4 regarding property access obstruction. You have 30 minutes to clear the area before we call county towing. This is harassment, Karen shrieks, her composure finally cracking. This man has been organizing illegal activities, threatening property values, undermining community stability. That's when County Inspector Williams arrives with his clipboard and a very serious expression. The timing is beautiful. I'd called ahead to coordinate their schedules. Ms. Whitfield, we're here about reports concerning unpermitted construction at 1247 Maple Street. Specifically, an illegal residential conversion and unreported rental income. The look on Karen's face was worth 2 weeks of blocked garage access. Pure terror as her secret empire started crumbling in front of half the neighborhood. But the best part was still coming. More neighbors gathered, drawn by the commotion. County towing trucks rumbled onto the scene. Sarah's news camera captured everything, and that's when I delivered the line I'd been saving for this exact moment. Karen, I said loud enough for everyone to hear, this was never about landscaping or parking or community standards. This was about you deciding that you get to control how everyone else lives. But here's what you never understood. I walked over to my garage door, pulled out my remote control, and pressed the button. The mechanism clicked, whirred, and slowly lifted the door to reveal my organized workshop, my tools, my equipment, everything exactly where it belonged. You never actually had the power you thought you did. The garage door opening felt like a curtain rising on the final act. Karen stared at my accessible workshop, her mouth hanging open like a broken circuit. How the power was disconnected? I'm an electrician, Karen. I fixed it. I smiled at her confusion. Tuesday night, after you had your nephew's crew accidentally damage my system. Took about 20 minutes to bypass their sabotage and install a backup power source. The crowd of neighbors started laughing. Not mean laughter, the kind of relieved, cathartic laughter that comes when a neighborhood bully finally gets exposed. Thompson stepped forward, holding a thick folder. Karen, this is a petition signed by 74 residents requesting your immediate removal from the HOA board for violation of fiduciary duty, conflicts of interest, and exceeding your authority. Sarah Thompson raised her voice from behind her camera. Ms. Whitfield, can you comment on allegations that you've been embezzling HOA funds to pay legal fees and bribing residents to provide false testimony? That's when Karen completely lost it. This is a conspiracy, she screamed, spinning to face the cameras and the crowd. These people are trying to destroy our community. They're attacking American values, undermining property rights, threatening our way of life. The sound of her voice cracking under pressure, the sight of her perfect composure shattering like cheap china, the smell of diesel exhaust mixed with the sweet scent of justice. It was perfect. Deputy Martinez stepped closer. Ma'am, I need you to calm down and cooperate with the vehicle removal. I won't be intimidated by... Karen. I interrupted her meltdown with calm authority. It's over. The towing trucks moved in. One by one, the massive vehicles that had imprisoned my garage were lifted onto flatbed trailers and removed. The sound of hydraulic lifts and diesel engines gradually faded, replaced by something I hadn't heard in weeks. Quiet. Karen stood in the middle of the street, surrounded by neighbors she'd terrorized and officials documenting her violations, and for the first time since this whole thing started, she had nothing to say. But I did. This was never about winning or losing, I announced to the gathered crowd, the cameras, the representatives of county government. This was about proving that real community power comes from people working together, not from one person trying to control everyone else. I reached into my wallet and pulled out $500, exact change for the fine Karen had tried to impose on me for wildflowers. I'm donating this to start a neighborhood improvement fund, real improvements, chosen by residents, not dictated by bullies. The applause started with Mrs. Rodriguez and spread through the crowd like electricity through a properly grounded system. Sarah's camera captured everything. The community celebration, Karen's public humiliation, the garage door standing open like a symbol of liberation. Karen tried one last desperate play. This isn't over. My lawyers will... Your lawyers are being paid with embezzled HOA funds, Patel announced, holding up financial records. Good luck explaining that to the district attorney. That's when Karen finally broke and ran, literally running back to her house while her perfect little kingdom collapsed behind her. The taste of victory was sweeter than I'd imagined. 6 months later, Pinewood Estates looks like a completely different place. The new HOA board, elected in an emergency vote 3 days after Karen's public meltdown, instituted transparency requirements that would make a government accountant proud. Monthly meetings with public minutes, competitive bidding for all contracts, term limits for board positions, and a community garden where Karen's nephew's equipment used to sit. My garage has become the unofficial community workshop. Riley and I teach basic electrical safety to neighbors who want to learn. Thompson shares mechanical knowledge with anyone interested. Mrs. Rodriguez started a small business making tamales that she stores in our commercial-grade refrigerator. Turns out that zoning violation Karen worried about was actually perfectly legal with proper permits. The smell of wildflowers from my front yard mixes with the scent of vegetables from community garden plots that now dot the neighborhood. Native plants have become the preferred landscaping choice, saving everyone money on water bills and creating habitat for the bees that hum through our streets like tiny symbols of democracy. Karen's house sold to a nice young family from Portland who loved the community spirit and environmental focus. They turned her illegal rental unit into an art studio and invited the neighborhood kids to paint murals on the garage door. Riley organized the project. Turns out leadership skills run in the family. The Pinewood Strong Scholarship has grown to $1,200, funded by the money recovered from Danny Whitfield's overcharges. It goes to local high school students pursuing skilled trades, electricians, plumbers, mechanics, the people who actually keep communities running. 3 recipients so far, all from families that Karen had targeted with harassment. Mrs. Rodriguez's cleaning business is thriving, with half the neighborhood as clients who specifically asked for her services after hearing about Karen's intimidation tactics. Word of mouth about standing up to bullies, it turns out, is excellent advertising. The regional newspaper series that Sarah Thompson published won a state journalism award for excellence in community reporting. The investigation led to new HOA oversight legislation that requires financial audits and limits board member authority. Karen's story became a cautionary tale taught in municipal government classes. Speaking of Karen, she settled all the civil and criminal charges by paying $43,000 in fines, back taxes, and restitution. Last I heard, she'd moved to a condo in Arizona with no HOA and very strict rules about community involvement. Apparently, she's much happier when someone else is in charge. The most important change is harder to measure, but impossible to miss. People talk to each other now. Kids play together in yards that used to be off limits. The sound of lawnmowers has been replaced by the buzz of conversation over garden fences and the laughter of impromptu street barbecues. Riley has become the unofficial neighborhood ambassador for any new families moving in. She walks them around, introduces them to everyone, explains how things work here, democracy in action, one conversation at a time. Watching her teach other kids about standing up for what's right while staying kind to everyone makes me prouder than any electrical job I've ever completed. The texture of community feels different now, stronger, like a properly grounded electrical system, where everyone's connected but safe, where power flows evenly instead of concentrating in dangerous surges that can burn everything down. Yesterday, Riley and I installed solar panels on Mrs. Rodriguez's roof, free of charge, because that's what neighbors do for each other. As we worked, I could see the whole neighborhood from up there. Gardens and workshops, kids and grandparents, different families living different lives but connected by something stronger than HOA bylaws. That's when I realized the most important thing this whole experience taught me. Real community isn't about following someone else's rules. It's about people choosing to take care of each other. The best revenge against those who abuse power isn't just proving they never had as much as they claimed. It's building something better in the space they tried to control. Karen Whitfield thought she owned Pinewood Estates, but she never understood that you can't own a community. You can only serve one or destroy one. We chose to serve ours, and it saved us all.
So Kevin Smith locked Karen Whitfield outside her own trap and watched 6 years of manufacturers' authorities crumble in one afternoon. 3 trucks, 18,000 trash tons, and one HOA tyrant who forgot the most important rule. Real power serves the community. It doesn't rule it. Here what gets me about this story. Kevin could have done what most of us do. either cave to the pressure or ignore and give Karen exactly the unhinged neighbor story she was building. Instead, he treated her harassment like an electrical problem. Diagnose, document, strategize. The moment he started keeping records and building alliances, this stopped being about white flowers and became about democracy. Karen's whole system relied on neighbors feeling isolated and helpless. But when people start talking, her fake authority evaporated. Look, maybe your HOA follows the rule, but every Karen starts small testing boundaries, seeing what people will tolerate. The best time to push back even after they've taken over is the first overreach. How many of you have paid a ridiculous fine just because fighting seemed like more chopper? Drop the most absurd HOA story below. Hit subscribe for more David vs. Goliath wins. Next week, a homeowner discovered his HOA literally stealing mail. And remember, they only have as much power as you give them.